We've talked a lot before about the benefits of green spaces on our mental health. And during lockdown, many people have said how they value getting out in nature more than ever. But is there something extra special about getting out into places where there's water? And before you think about rushing to the beach, it doesn't have to just mean the seaside. Could a pond or even a fountain in a park make us feel better? Dr. Mathew White, who's a senior lecturer in social and environmental psychology at Exeter University, is part of a large research project across 18 countries called BlueHealth, which is trying to find some answers. I asked him what kind of water is most beneficial.
What particularly seems to be important is not just water. I mean, being on a boat in the middle of the ocean can be quite boring and stressful. It seems to be the margins where water meets green space. It's the banks, it's the beaches. These are the places that seem to confer the most benefits. And one of the crucial things is, we find three pathways really. The first is physical activity. When we're thinking about positive outcomes on mental health, spending time by the water is associated with more physical activity, longer walks, for example, than other types of physical activity. So people are exercising longer. The one that really gets me every time is that blue spaces are social spaces. When I started this project, I had my head about the males of Poldark walking around the cliffs of Cornwall, contemplating the questions in life. These people are the exceptions. Most people meet up with friends and family and they go and play on the beach. They paddle in streams, have picnics on the banks. Now, we all know how important strong social bonds are for mental health. And blue spaces are a great social leveller. The national data says things like woodlands, they do promote mental health, but they're predominantly used by the middle classes. By contrast, blue spaces are used by all sectors of society, and given the rates of poor mental health are highest in poorer communities, then this makes blue spaces even more important for helping reduce inequalities in mental health, I think.
And do you think there's something about the fact that water is usually moving, sometimes moving very dramatically, if you think of something lovely like a waterfall, and so it's constantly changing?
I think that's absolutely right. It's been extremely difficult to pin that down in experimental studies. It seems to be the whole experience, which is why the qualitative work has actually been really important here. The water captures your attention, there's movement changes, light changes, but it's gentle and non-threatening. And we've got some evidence to suggest that people, particularly with anxiety or depression, are able to have less maladaptive rumination thoughts while walking on the beach, for example, and think more about external things, the natural environment, rather than their own issues. This is tentative evidence at the moment, but certainly more than we see them reporting on inland walks, for example.
As part of the Blue Health project, Dr. Garrett, who's also at Exeter University, has been investigating whether people who live closer to the sea have better mental health on average. She studied data from 26,000 people.
So we used a large survey, the Health Survey for England, and this is nationally representative, so this is really robust survey evidence. And we looked at where people lived and how close they lived to the coast, and whether there was a relationship between this coastal proximity and their mental health. And we found that those living closest to the coast had better mental health than those living further away. But then we also divided our full sample into categories of household income. And once we did that, we found that actually that relationship was only there for those on the lowest household income. And so those living within 5 kilometres from the coast had better mental health than those living further than 50 kilometres.
And why do you think that might have only applied to those on the lower incomes?
I think partly living closer to the coast is at least partly offsetting some of the health inequalities associated with lower household income, and also partly because having access to nature nearby their homes is more important for people on lower incomes in allowing easy access, whereas proximity is not so important for those perhaps with more resources to access natural environments further away.
And you've done research looking at coastal cities like Hong Kong as well. Did you see a benefit there if people were nearer to the water or if they went near the water more often?
Yes, in Hong Kong, and we didn't actually look at proximity to the coast. We didn't have information on where people live, but we did look at how often they visited blue spaces. So that's perhaps even a better measure if whether they're using blue spaces or not. And we found that there was a relationship between visiting blue spaces at least once a week and better mental health.
And in the Blue Health project, which is across 18 different countries, you've looked at all sorts of different settings where there's water, including lagoons and rivers in towns and cities and wetlands and even fountains in parks. And you've yet to publish the detail on these settings. But are there some that do seem to be effective that might be surprising? People might guess this about the sea, but are others just as good sometimes?
Well, the one that surprised me the most was actually frozen lakes. Fishing in frozen lakes in Sweden and Estonia. That's a big thing over there. I had no idea. I didn't think of blue spaces as frozen spaces. And I think the thing that surprised me most was just how differently water is used across the world. So pretty much everywhere around the world, people are drawn to them. So one of the other things we've been doing is looking at this virtual reality. Can we bottle some of these benefits and take them to people who can't get out, people in care homes? We've been working with people in memory cafes and in dental surgeries when people are having surgery. Of course, a lot of this work had to stop during COVID, just at the very time when working with people in care homes would have been perhaps most useful. But colleagues in Lund, especially in Sweden, have been working for a number of years supporting people, for instance, with dementia, revisit places that were important to them when they were younger, coastal places, and also introduce them to things like diving and underwater scenes where they will probably never be able to go. So it's not just about visiting these places. We can virtually enhance them.
And do you have any idea how much of a dose we need, if you like, of some water, of a lake or whatever it is? Do you know the ideal amount of time to spend doing that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, overall nature, what we find is that roughly 2 hours a week seems to be critical. So mental health is not significantly better compared to no time a week, any time less than 2 hours a week. 2 hours a week and over is where we're seeing the benefits.
Do you think that we might see a day where people are prescribed time in a blue space?
There's global interest in the idea of green prescriptions, and we would add to that blue prescriptions. I think I would be very cautious and want to work with the individuals on a case by case basis, maybe using motivational interviewing, to find out what places they like to spend time in. And the evidence suggests most people would like to spend time in blue spaces, and therefore work out how to best support them. Because, of course, they're also quite dangerous places. So someone with anxiety disorder, for example, might be quite worried about risks of drowning. So you need to work through those issues on a case-by-case basis rather than having blanket schemes.
Mathew White and Joe Garrett. And my guest for the whole show today is Catherine Loveday, who's Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience at the University of Westminster. Now, Catherine, the last thing we want to do is to encourage everyone to go off to beaches that might be crowded. So it's interesting, it doesn't have to be the coast.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the sea, but actually I really love sitting by a waterfall or a brook as well. And I wonder if it's something to do with the sound. One of the things I've been doing in lockdown is actually just listening to the sea and listening to waterfalls. I find it really, really comforting.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what different sounds do make. And of course, one place where there is